And Donald Trump dared to say that we can actually put America first. And that is why they have done everything in their power, be it lawsuits to assassination attempts, which my opponent this evening makes jokes about and thinks they're actually warranted, to stop this man, because he upsets those orthodoxies in a way that no one else dared to.
John Doyle goes head-to-head with destiny, challenging nearly every progressive claim with bold, unapologetic counterpoints. From Trump's presidency to foreign policy and the cultural battles over gender and national priorities, John Doyle doesn't just hold his ground, he flips the script and exposes the double standards destiny relies on. Let's break down a few of the most critical moments where John Doyle shuts destiny down.
We have two parties in the United States, and right now, one of those parties lives in delusion. Conservatives rely on the ability to cast a huge net and to cover a ton of ground and to lie and lie and lie about every single topic they bring up. That's why if you try to ever actually force a conservative to own a particular position, they will pivot away from that and go to some other position where they will lie. Okay, most of the people that, for instance, I'm debating on these types of debates now don't believe, for instance, that dinosaurs existed. If you look at things like, I believe, the response to the recent disasters was brought up in North Carolina. If you look at the responses from DeSantis, if you look at the responses from Kemp in Georgia, if you look at the response from Collins, everybody is saying we are getting exactly what we need. Joe Biden has called these people already. It is a lie that Donald Trump is pushing. It is a lie that conservatives like John Doyle are pushing, that states aren't getting what they need from Biden. This is just not true. Google.com, search for it. Governor's response. Recent disaster, governor's response, hurricane. It's not true. Everything he says is a lie. Now, on the contrary, there has been Donald Trump who has refused aid to states before. There are reported conversations with Kushner saying that Donald Trump wanted to withhold aid from people. Initially in California, when the wildfires were happening under his term, Donald Trump withheld that aid. And a speech a few days ago, Donald Trump talked again about potentially withholding aid from California if they didn't sign on to a bill that would open up more land in the north for agricultural purposes. There is only one president that I know of in recent history that has threatened to withhold national federal aid from states in times of disaster, and that is Donald Trump. Joe Biden has never done this. You will not find statements of him ever doing this. You can look at, I believe, Roy Collins on Twitter right now, just yesterday tweeted a thanks to Biden for calling him and providing everything that they need. This is a lie, like basically every other thing that is said in support of the Republicans. And even ignoring all of the policy, we can even say, fine, maybe they might have a better stance on the border. They don't. Maybe they might have a better stance on the economy. They don't. Maybe they might have a better stance on foreign policy. They definitely don't. Fine, maybe they do, but even if they did, Donald Trump wouldn't be the guy that would be able to get anything done. Donald Trump was not able to get funding for the wall. He wasn't able to build the wall. He ruled like a dictator with executive order. I think he built an itty-bitty fence, and then he walked away with his tail between his legs, and he called that a victory. So if you did want a wall, if immigration was something that was scary to you, why would you rely on Donald Trump, who was a massive and total and utter failure in his administration, where both sides of Congress are controlled by his party, to do anything? Why? He wouldn't be the guy for it. He was incapable of doing it.
But I mean, John Doyle actually explains why Trump had trouble executing. It wasn't because Trump was incompetent. It was because the entire Washington machine fought against him. John Doyle lays it out plain. Trump didn't inherit a ready-made team like the swampy Bushes did. And destiny acting like Trump failed on purpose just shows how disconnected he is from what John Doyle's actually saying. Like John Doyle said, disruption isn't smooth, and Trump disrupted everything.
And he was only able to have such good numbers because he was able to rely on COVID to shut down the border with Title 42, and he was able to rely on the fact that a lot of people were sick and didn't feel like making the journey to the United States. And you can tell because if you look at that graph that he lies about, that he shows at events where he says, this is when I left office, he actually left office like about a year later when the immigration numbers are starting to spike up again. So if immigration is your issue, Donald Trump's not the guy to solve it. He can't work with Congress to pass legislation. There was a big bill on the border from Langford that Doyle, for some reason, called a Democrat authored. This bill had widespread support among Republicans until Donald Trump came and shut it down. Interviews with Langford confirmed this. You can watch a speech with Ted Cruz where he says this. You can watch McConnell talking about it in the Senate where he confirms this. Nobody's debating this seriously except for the people, the sycophants that try to carry water for Trump outside of his administration. I say outside of his administration because nobody from his last administration is left. How do you have all these people? You know, you look at the people that he surrounded himself with. Where are they at? Donald Trump won in 2016 running on a ticket with Vice President Mike Pence or ex-Vice President Mike Pence. Where is Pence? Why isn't he running anymore? Oh, because when he was in office last, Donald Trump basically watched and tried to get him killed when he was at the at the Capitol building trying to certify the election. Donald Trump sat by and he watched for 3 hours. You want to talk about a dereliction of duty or an absent commander in chief? He sat by and he watched while the Capitol was rioted, while it was taken over for 3 hours, doing absolutely nothing in the attempts to maybe win the election because the people would be too scared to certify it after he riled his crowd up and he sent them out of the Capitol. If you look at Donald Trump's approach to foreign policy, it was a joke. People say there were no wars under Donald Trump. What do you mean? No, what does that even mean? We were in a conflict all over the world. He was still doing drone strikes in Yemen. We did the assassination of Soleimani. We had troops that were active in Syria. We had a military presence that was still in Afghanistan. There was still a Russian occupation of Crimea. There was an Iranian attack on Saudi Arabia. There were riots in the Gaza Strip. Like when we say there were no wars in the rest of the world, this is just another conservative delusion. And what are the foreign policy positions that Donald Trump has? And don't just, not the empty platitudes, okay? Not Donald Trump where he stands and he leans forward like a fucking giraffe because you don't want people to see that he weighs 350 pounds, okay? Give me an actual policy position that Donald Trump has or has at least espoused when it comes to dealing with, we can't do that. Because every single time on every single interview where Donald Trump is asked about his foreign policy, he says, I can't spoil it, it's a secret. Well, it's not a secret. We watched what happened when he was in office. When he sent Tillerson and Pence over to North Korea, later on Trump tweeted out, Tillerson, don't waste your time. Okay, I think Pence actually said it was a fucking waste of time. I believe that was reported behind the scenes. Nobody thought that anything could happen in North Korea. They were back to testing their missiles a month later. Nothing happened there, except for the fact that Kim got a photo with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, for the first time in U.S. history, was the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces saluting an enemy's military for who the fuck knows what reason.
Sounds to me like Destiny going full drama queen over a salute. Meanwhile, John Doyle is over here reminding everyone that Trump actually brought tensions down. No new wars, strong negotiations, and yeah, John Doyle isn't pretending Trump was perfect, but he's honest about what worked. Like, would you rather have performative outrage or real peace? John Doyle isn't cosplaying a diplomat. He's just pointing out that under Trump, things were way more stable than what Destiny's trying to sell.
Let's see. Did he have a good success in any good success in Syria? Well, let's see. He completely and utterly ditched our allies, the Kurdish fighters that were fighting alongside the FSA against Bashar al-Assad, somebody who engaged in chemical warfare against his own citizens enough that Trump saw fit to bomb an airport. Was that also another action that wasn't a war or wasn't part of military conflict? I don't know. It's hard to keep track of what conservatives consider what, because it seems like they got a double standard for literally everything. And when I say double standard, I mean an actual human standard for Democrats and actually no standard for Republicans. When we look at things like the economy, we talked about pulling kids out of childhood poverty. Did Donald Trump have a policy for that? Well, let's see. When he was in front of that economic forum and they asked him, Donald Trump, what one specific policy would you actually give in order to alleviate childhood poverty? He gave an answer that puts Biden at his worst moments to shame. This was one of the most unbelievable word salads I've ever heard in my entire life. I thought the man was either about to have a stroke or was halfway through one by the time he finished his answer to that question. But again, Republicans have absolutely no standards. They do not live in reality. They think that oil is a self-replenishing thing that comes from the ground because dinosaurs weren't real. Half of them think the Earth is 6,000 years old. We had all these predictions about COVID and the mRNA vaccines and the Chinese-made virus in the lab that didn't come true. Nothing the conservatives have said has come true in terms of all the fear-mongering they did. Nothing. We had 4 years of Biden. Where's my communism? Where was the destruction of the country? It's not here. We've got Donald Trump who wants to come into the next administration to do what? Put 10 or 20% tariffs on everything? What, is he going to go back on the U.S., Mexico, Canada, the North America Free Trade Agreement, the one that he was so proud of that superseded NAFTA? Is he going to destroy that so that he can tariff everything? Or is he just speaking empty platitudes? Or, more likely, does Donald Trump not even really know what a tariff is? Does Donald Trump know the difference between a trade deficit and a budget deficit and our national debt? You might want to, defend him and say, well, I'm sure he does know the difference. But then if that's the case, why is it that in the 4 years of Donald Trump, where our economy was doing so well, why the fuck were we running record deficits before COVID? Why was this happening? If Donald Trump and the Republicans are so good about tackling our debt and doing something about the deficit, why was he still running record deficits while the economy was exploding 25% year over year over year? Why was Donald Trump trying to use Twitter to bully Powell, to bully the Federal Reserve, to keep interest rates low? Why was Donald Trump sending his Department of Justice into the states to try to fabricate election results? Why was Donald Trump trying to bully Jeff Sessions or Comey or Christopher Wray to kill investigations related to him or people around him, when people in his close company, like Roger Stone, were directly communicating with foreign adversaries in order to leak information about about the Democrats? Donald Trump is easily one of the worst presidents of all time, and his character should reflect on the people that defend him as well. Because remember, the only way to defend Donald Trump is to ignore reality, to be delusional, to pretend that everything under his administration didn't happen, to pretend that things under Biden have happened that haven't happened, and to pretend that somehow in the future he's going to be able to do all of these things that he had a monumental failure of attempting during his 4 years. And remember, it's going to be with an entirely new administration, because nobody that works with Trump ever wants to work with him again, because either they see that Trump is corrupt or he calls them a rhino. And so now we have a new Trump. We've got a new vice president with Trump, a guy that said he would co-sign onto all of the malicious activity that Trump wants to do, which Pence wasn't willing to go along with. God knows who he'd want to staff the Department of Justice with, or what any of his other cabinet positions would be like. And God help us all. Even if Trump loses the election, honestly, even if he loses the election by a landslide, the fact that there are so many tens of millions of Americans that have been lied to and tricked and deceived by the figures that were supposed to be on the left. Remember when we were supposed to have a George Soros controlling all of our communications, and instead we got an Elon Musk who is full-throatedly, avowedly, pro-Trump and posting AI misinformation about Kamala Harris, on a social media platform. Remember when the Hunter Biden laptop suppression was like the worst thing that's ever happened in the world? And then we get a J.D. Vance leak, and all of a sudden, now Republicans believe in foreign interference. Now people leaking stuff about actual politicians. Believe it or not, Hunter Biden never ran for anything. I don't know if people remember that or not. Now it's a huge problem. Censoring stories was supposed to be the worst thing. We care about doxing. We care about all these things now. It's crazy how Republicans discover morality and standards whenever they have to levy any type of criticism to the left. I just wish that at some point they would live up to a single standard or apply anything consistently across the board.
Thank you very much for that 10-minute opening statement as well, Stephen. We are going to switch it back to John for his 5-minute rebuttal. John, thanks very much. The floor is all yours.
It seemed to me like there was a lot there that was generally just firing from the hip at Republicans and specifically Donald Trump. And I think what it gets down to, which is what this debate often does, is just competing views of how politics actually works in this country. Destiny seems to be somebody who has faith in the establishment and the system, generally speaking, to do its job. And Donald Trump's political project is exactly the opposite of that. Donald Trump's political project was to go in and drain the swamp. And as anybody who's a Trump supporter knows, and maybe even laments, that did not exactly happen in his first administration. And it's because Donald Trump was the first president under the Republican ticket who was not awarded a mechanically functioning administration. Donald Trump, even George Bush, who I don't think anyone here maybe is a fan of the way that his administration functioned, but that administration functioned as it should have, in the sense that George Bush was able to delegate and get things done. Donald Trump was not able to do this because there were so many people who understood that he was simply an irritant to an otherwise functioning, well-oiled machine, which is the Washington establishment. They didn't necessarily want to hitch their cart to that and taint a resume. Or you had Reince Priebus, the former head of the RNC. He had a Rolodex of names ready to go to fill these staffing positions. So it's not at all surprising to me that Trump was not able to execute the way that other presidents, including Republican presidents, were able to execute, because everything that Trump sought to do was a disruption of orthodoxies which have existed for 60 years and would like to exist after Donald Trump. And I think that a lot of those personnel issues have been resolved since. I think he understands some of the problems there. But I also think it's sort of nonsensical to conflate, sort of Republican delusion with Democrat delusion. Because when you have Republican delusion, that's like your aunt or uncle at dinner who says something like, I don't know, what if elites are like satanic and do crazy rituals? And it's like, yeah, that's crazy. Democrat delusion is like what these people run on. They run on the issue of, hey, what if we put an axe wound in between a child's legs? Wouldn't that be neat? Hey, what if we couldn't actually define like what a woman is? Things like that. Again, very low-hanging fruit, but simultaneously, I think very important to understand exactly which party is the one advertising and establishing power based on delusion. And so I didn't really hear much that was addressing the points I laid out directly in terms of why Trump did X. It was successful. Biden undid X, and now we are experiencing bad results because of that. And so in terms of Trump's staffing issues, Again, you have an incentive there to not want to hitch your cart to that, whereas Kamala Harris had the highest overturning rate for her White House staff in history. It was like 92%. 92% of people who were working for her went away. They said, no thank you, no more. What kind of leader is it where people who are the closest to her, working for her, in proximity to her, with no other incentive, no other obvious lily pad? I mean, you're working for Kamala Harris. That's maybe the future president, that's the vice president. They still left those jobs because working for her was such a nightmare. So the idea that she could somehow command and be a better executive than Donald Trump is just complete nonsense. Moreover, we haven't even heard that case. All we've heard is that Donald Trump is bad because Republicans are delusional or things like that. The tariff policy, I don't understand why we're against tariffs. Tariffs are like as American as apple pie. Every man who's on Mount Rushmore was a protectionist. 95% of all imports during the height of America's economic growth in the 19th and 20th century were tariffed. Biden even kept the tariffs that Trump implemented, so if they were so bad with the Chinese imports, I mean, you would think that he would have repealed those, but of course he didn't. He held on to them. So I think that, the president is the executive. He doesn't have to necessarily pass bipartisan legislation to be an effective president. He is the executive, the chief executive. Sam Francis once said that there are two parties in D.C. You have an evil party and a retarded party. And occasionally, those two parties get together and do something evil and retarded, and we call that bipartisanship. I think that's actually true. I don't think bipartisan legislation is an accurate measure for what makes a good leader. Congress has, what, a 2% approval rating on its best day, something like that? We think working with these people, these swamp rats, is actually indicative of what makes a good leader. A good leader is someone who can get in there and just pass his legislation through. We'll figure out the legality. I shouldn't say it. We'll pass his legislation and, it gets held up in the courts, as it often did with Trump, for example, when he was trying to work through the executive branch and get these different things done. Again, he passed what? The tax cut. Why? Because even though we maybe agree with tax cuts, ultimately the people who are in charge don't really have a problem with tax cuts. So you have deficit spending, like he said, when the government's taking in less revenue. I don't know what that deficit was precisely, but I bet that it was bigger than the amount that the wall would have cost. Why can't we have a wall? Why can't we have mass deportation? Because immigration is what benefits the ruling class, because we have more people coming in from other countries. They are reliant upon the establishment for money, opportunities, etc., which are then taken away from American citizens, as we've seen with the job growth, as we see with money that's going for relief, all sorts of different things. The Haitians, I don't know why, I was driving through Ohio to get here. I never thought I'd see a Haitian in Ohio. Nothing against Haitians, it's just, peas, apples and oranges, I guess. I don't know. But that should not be happening. We should not be prioritizing the interests of other people from all over the world like we have been during this administration. And Donald Trump dared to say that we can actually put America first. And that is why they have done everything in their power, be it lawsuits to assassination attempts, which my opponent this evening makes jokes about and thinks they're actually warranted, to stop this man, because he upsets those orthodoxies in a way that no one else dared to.
Thank you very much for that 5-minute rebuttal. We'll switch back to Stephen for his 5-minute rebuttal. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Okay, tell me when I'm getting on time, okay? Because I don't have a timer in front of me, okay?
Will do.
Okay, all right, or give me a 30-second notice, okay. Okay, well, Donald Trump talks about draining the swamp. I'm sorry, Donald Trump is the swamp.
So, Destiny is basically projecting here. He's accusing Donald Trump of being the swamp. But like John Doyle said, Trump's biggest problem was that he didn't fit into the swamp. John Doyle kept hammering that Trump was sabotaged from within by people who wanted him to fail. You can't drain a swamp if the entire system is built to drown you. Destiny calls that failure, but John Doyle calls that resistance from corrupt power. And honestly, he's right.
The most effective swamp that Donald Trump drained were his own cabinet members. When every single person around a guy, whether be it his personal people like Cohen, be it his own cabinet members like Rex Tillerson, people like Mike Pence, be it his own family members or his wife like Melania, who doesn't want to even be fucking seen with him, whether it's other people in office who are begging him to call off the rioters on January 6th, like when him and McCarthy got into a fight on the phone. Every single person that has worked with Trump says that he is trash, and he is trash. How can you scream about having Jabba the Hutt draining the swamp when he is the swamp? Everywhere he goes is a swamp. If Donald Trump hadn't done The Apprentice, he would be a brokey crackhead wandering the streets of the Bronx or Manhattan trying to get a hit. He is a loser in every single part of his life, and the party backing him right now are losers. And I don't mean that in the abstract sense of let's have another 5-hour conversation about trans issues, but I mean that in the sense that his personal business adventures have been an epic failure. He's filed bankruptcy almost over half a dozen times, I believe. People from his prior administration have abandoned him. His own family is abandoning him. He is a convicted felon for a good reason, too. He's facing more felony charges. All of the lawyers that were working with him before have been either criminally indicted, criminally convicted, or in the case of people like Powell or Giuliani, disbarred, meaning they can't even practice law again, or Eastman as well. So the idea that we need to drain the swamp, Trump is the swamp, and he surrounds himself with the swamp. I've never seen people so gleefully line up to celebrate when a guy says, I fired the bad people, ignoring the fact that he hired the bad people too. You can't complain and cry about your own administration when it's your administration. And if you want to, that's fine. You could do that. But it just goes to further prove my point. Donald Trump is not the guy for the job. Even if you hate Kamala Harris, even if you think that Donald Trump's policies are good, he's clearly an ineffective leader. And I'm not willing to sit by for another 4 years while this guy takes another run at the office to see if maybe he can figure out how the fuck to do his job this time, because he clearly was incapable of doing it last time. The Republicans, for the first time in the history of the United States Congress, weren't even able to keep their majority speaker seat because there was so much infighting in the party. It's absolutely insane that we would look at a party like this and think they're capable of governing. That you have a president that is trying to aggressively witch hunt into the ground all of these people. You want to bring up concrete facts again. Look at Roy Collins' response in North Carolina today compared to under Trump's administration when they put in a request for some I think it was $800 million, and they got like 8. They got 1% of the requested aid. You could Google this. North Carolina, 2017, requested financial aid, requested federal aid. You could find this. This is all real. They're all facts. There's no way to hide from them. You know what else is facts? You want to talk about draining the swamp? Why do you have pardon lists that people like Giuliani and Eastman are referring to when they're working for Donald Trump? Why are these people going into office assuming they're going to be breaking crimes, asking to be put on pardon list afterwards? Why is Donald Trump pardoning people like Manafort, who's proven to work in Ukraine, the thing, and taking money without declaring it, the things that the Republicans so desperately have been trying to accuse Hunter Biden of doing for years? Why is Donald Trump pardoning people like Blackwater contractors who were responsible for massacres in the country of Iraq? I thought we didn't like foreign intervention. I thought we didn't like this type of foreign policy. I guess unless Donald Trump is saying things like we're going to kill the terrorist families or we're going to take all of the Syrian oil fields. I wish the Republican delusion was just about dinosaurs or oil, but unfortunately, the Republican delusion runs far deeper and is far sicker. You heard Doyle laugh and joke and say, well, you got to pass legislation and then figure out the legality afterwards. He's joking, but that's not a joke. That was the plan on January 6th. That's why Eastman said, we're going to try this particular thing, but if it gets tested to the courts, we'll probably lose 2-7. No, we'll probably lose 0-9. We'll probably lose every single Supreme Court justice. But you know what? I bet it won't even make it to court because it's a major political question. We're not even going to touch it. And that was the whole plan to overthrow the election. 80% of Republicans still to this day don't even believe that the results of the last election were real. So unfortunately, the delusion goes much further. You want to talk about what is a woman? Well, right now, according to a conservative, a woman could be a fucking fugitive of her state if she is crossing state lines because she might be going after an abortion. A woman might be somebody who you can track at the border if she wants to drive into another state that has legalized access to certain types of contraceptions or certain types of abortion procedures because you don't want her to be able to have an abortion.
30 seconds.
I mean, the idea that Republican delusion, doesn't run as deep as it does and isn't deeply rotting, not only in a character and moral sense, but also just in a procedural sense, is laughable. Again, you want to talk about Donald Trump, and the fact that tariffs are great. I don't know where that 95% number came from, but Donald Trump's big crowning achievements were tax cuts, which was deficit spending, and renegotiating the NAFTA agreement into the U.S. Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, now which he wants to completely destroy with tariffs. So even the little bit that he did accomplish was either just deficit spending like they accuse Democrats of doing, or something that he wants to blow up as soon as he gets into office anyway.
John Doyle didn't just respond, he dismantled Destiny's entire worldview. Every time Destiny went on a rant about Trump being the swamp or a loser, John Doyle calmly brought it back to actual policy, real institutional resistance, and the reason Trump's movement exists in the first place. While Destiny spun out with personal attacks, John Doyle hit with structure, history, and facts. And it showed. John Doyle didn't just defend Trump, he made the case for why millions still believe in what Trump represents.